The emergency klaxon had been silent for 3 months now. I kept the red warning light blinking out of habit more than necessity, a lighthouse for ships that would never come. My name is Marcus Chen, former xenobiologist, current last human in known existence, and reluctant witness to the most extraordinary biological phenomenon in recorded history. The Zephyrian crisis began 18 months ago when their scout ships first breached our outer detection grid. Not with weapons or demands, but with a distress signal so primal it transcended language barriers. Their species was dying, not from war or plague, but from a reproductive cycle gone catastrophically wrong. The Zephyrians, tall, ethereal beings with iridescent skin that shifted between blue and silver, had evolved a mating system so complex and precise that even minor environmental changes could disrupt their entire species continuity. I remember Dr. Sarah Voss, the mission's lead anthropologist, explaining it to our team during those first frantic weeks of contact. Their reproductive cycle is triggered by specific stellar radiation patterns that occur only once every 7 Earth years, she had said, her voice tight with the implications. But their home system's sun has been destabilizing. The radiation signatures are all wrong now. They're biologically primed for reproduction with no way to complete the cycle. That was before we understood the true scope of the crisis. The Zephyrians weren't just facing extinction, they were trapped in a state of perpetual biological readiness, their bodies flooded with hormones and neural chemicals that drove them to seek reproductive partners with an intensity that bordered on madness. When their own kind couldn't provide the necessary biological triggers, their desperation led them to seek alternatives among other species. The evacuation of Research Station Omega-7 came suddenly. One moment we were conducting preliminary biological compatibility tests, the next we were loading emergency transport pods as Zephyrian behavior became increasingly erratic. Most of my colleagues made it to the transport ships. Dr. Voss was among the last to leave, pressing a data tablet into my hands as the evacuation alarm screamed overhead. "The hormone synthesis data is all in there," she shouted over the noise. "If there's any chance of helping them, you'll find it in those files." I should have left with her. Should have followed protocol and abandoned the station like everyone else. But I had spent 7 years studying xenobiology, dreaming of first contact, of being part of humanity's greatest discovery. I couldn't walk away from what might be our only chance to prevent the extinction of an entire species. So I stayed. Alone with my research, my fears, and 7 Zephyrians whose biological desperation was growing stronger by the day. The first month after evacuation was the hardest. Not because of the isolation, I had always been comfortable with solitude, but because of the weight of responsibility. Every day I watched Cassandra, the Zephyrian expedition leader, struggle against her own biology. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, her 7-foot frame moving with fluid grace despite the obvious distress that radiated from her being. Her skin, normally a calm silver blue, had begun taking on deeper, more vibrant hues that pulsed in rhythm with her elevated heart rate. "Marcus," she would say during our daily research sessions, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in my chest, "your species' adaptability may be the key to saving mine. But I fear what we might ask of you in our desperation." I was weak then. Weak in my convictions, weak in my understanding of what was truly at stake. I told myself I was conducting research, maintaining scientific objectivity while documenting an unprecedented xenobiological crisis. But the truth was simpler and more human. I was terrified of the responsibility and attracted to beings I could never truly understand. The breakthrough came during my analysis of Zephyrian neural chemistry. Their mating process wasn't just physical, it was a complex neurochemical dance that required specific environmental triggers, hormonal responses, and bioelectric feedback loops. Without their star's unique radiation, their bodies were producing all the preparatory chemicals but couldn't complete the cycle. They were trapped in a state of biological limbo that was slowly driving them insane. But humans, I discovered, had something the Zephyrians lacked: adaptability. Our nervous systems were crude compared to theirs, but they were also remarkably flexible. With the right biochemical interface, a human might be able to provide the neural feedback necessary to complete their reproductive cycle, not for actual reproduction, which remained biologically impossible between our species, but to reset their systems and end their torment. The data was clear, but the implications were staggering. To help them, I would need to allow one of them to form a temporary neural bond with me during their peak fertility state. It was dangerous, unprecedented, and would require me to overcome every instinct for self-preservation I possessed. That night, as I reviewed the data for the 100th time, I realized something profound about myself. The man who had stayed behind while others evacuated wasn't brave, he was scared. Scared of making the hard choice, scared of the consequences, scared of failing. I had been hiding behind my research, using scientific inquiry as a shield against the real decision I needed to make. The old Marcus Chen, the one who second-guessed every choice and paralyzed himself with overthinking, would have transmitted the data to Earth and waited for someone else to decide. But that Marcus Chen was a weak version of myself, one that had to die if I was going to save 7 lives and possibly an entire species. I made my decision that night, alone in the laboratory with the weight of cosmic responsibility on my shoulders. I would help them, whatever the cost to myself. Part 2, Into the Heath. The Zephyrian reproductive state, which they called Velthari in their harmonic language, was unlike anything in human biology. Dr. Martinez's research notes, which I had studied obsessively during the empty months, described it as a complete physiological transformation that affected every system in their bodies. Heart rate tripled, skin temperature rose by 15 degrees, and their already acute senses became so hypersensitive that normal conversation required them to modulate their vocal harmonics to prevent overwhelming their own nervous systems. Cassandra was the first to enter the critical phase. I found her in the station's observation deck at dawn, her skin now a deep, pulsing cobalt that seemed to generate its own light. She stood perfectly still, staring out at Kepler 442b's twin suns, but every muscle in her body was taut with barely contained energy. "The time has come, Marcus," she said without turning around. Her voice carried new harmonics now, subsonic frequencies that made my bones vibrate. I can feel my neural pathways restructuring themselves, preparing for a bond that may never come. If we do nothing, I will burn out from the inside. My mind will fragment, and I will lose all capacity for rational thought. I approached carefully, acutely aware that I was now dealing with a being whose biological imperatives had overridden much of her conscious control. The neural interface device I had constructed sat heavy in my hand, a crude amalgamation of human neurology equipment and salvaged Zephyrian biosensors that represented humanity's first attempt at cross-species neural bridging. "Explain the process to me one more time," I said, though I had memorized every detail from her previous descriptions. The ritual of explanation was as much for my benefit as hers, a way to maintain some illusion of clinical detachment from what we were about to attempt. Cassandra turned to face me, and I saw that her eyes had changed. The normally silver irises now swirled with patterns of blue and gold that seemed to pulse in sync with her heartbeat. "The Velthari requires a neural feedback loop," she explained, her voice carefully controlled despite the obvious strain. "In normal circumstances, a compatible Zephyrian partner would provide the necessary bioelectric resonance through direct neural contact. Your device should, theoretically, allow you to substitute for that partner. The process would require us to maintain neural contact for approximately 6 hours, the time necessary for her reproductive system to complete its cycle and return to normal function. During that time, our nervous systems would be directly linked, sharing not just bioelectric impulses but thoughts, emotions, and sensory experiences. There are risks," she continued, and I could see the effort it took for her to maintain scientific objectivity while her body was screaming for relief. "Your neural patterns are fundamentally different from ours. The feedback could damage your nervous system, or worse, the incompatibility could drive you into a form of neural cascade that would be fatal." I had run the calculations myself. The probability of severe neurological damage was 37%. The probability of death was 19%. Under normal circumstances, these would be unacceptable odds for any medical procedure. But these weren't normal circumstances. I was the only human within 50 light-years, and Cassandra would die without intervention. More than that, her death would likely trigger similar fatal episodes in the other 6 Zephyrians as their own reproductive cycles peaked in sequence over the following weeks. "I understand the risks," I told her, attaching the neural interface to the base of my skull. The device felt cold against my skin, its biometallic surface already beginning to establish preliminary connections with my nervous system.
What do I need to know about the process itself?
Cassandra moved closer, her movements now carrying an alien fluidity that spoke of biology far removed from human evolution. Once the connection is established, you will experience Valthari through my nervous system. The intensity may be overwhelming. We evolved this state to ensure reproductive success despite significant environmental challenges.
You will feel everything I feel, think thoughts that are not entirely your own.
She paused, her skin cycling through deeper shades of blue as her body temperature continued to rise.
More challenging still, I will experience human neural patterns for the first time. Your species' emotional processes, your sensory interpretation of reality, it may be equally overwhelming for me. The irony wasn't lost on me.
In trying to save her from biological torment, I was asking us both to venture into uncharted neurological territory that could destroy either or both of us. But, the decision was made. I activated the neural interface and felt the first tentative connections forming between our nervous systems. The initial contact was gentle, almost subtle, a barely perceptible shift in my awareness that suggested I was no longer alone in my own mind. Then, Cassandra moved closer, her long fingers finding specific points along my temples and neck where Zephyrian neural anatomy suggested optimal connection points, and the sensation exploded into something beyond human experience. The Valthari state hit me like a massive surge of electricity coursing through every nerve in my body. My heart rate tripled in seconds, my skin flushed with heat, and my senses suddenly became so acute that I could hear the electromagnetic hum of the station's power systems, feel the minute vibrations of air recycling equipment 3 levels below us, taste the subtle chemical variations in the atmosphere that indicated Cassandra's emotional state. But, more than the physical sensations was the emotional intensity. The Valthari wasn't just biological arousal, it was a state of complete psychological openness, a desperate need for connection that transcended mere physical contact. Through the neural link, I felt Cassandra's loneliness, her terror at the thought of her species' extinction, her overwhelming gratitude that someone had chosen to risk themselves for her survival. And she felt my fear, my uncertainty, my deeply human need to help others even at personal cost. Through her nervous system, I experienced her surprise at the intensity of human emotional range, the chaotic beauty of thoughts and feelings that evolved without the harmonic structure that governed Zephyrian consciousness. The hours that followed blurred together in a symphony of shared sensation and thought. I learned that Zephyrian consciousness operated on multiple levels simultaneously. They could hold separate trains of thought in parallel while maintaining an overarching awareness that integrated all streams of information. Their emotions were more nuanced but less volatile than human feelings, building and evolving like musical compositions rather than the sharp peaks and valleys that characterized human emotional experience. Through my nervous system, Cassandra experienced the raw, unfiltered intensity of human consciousness for the first time. She felt the way human thoughts could cascade from one association to another in seconds, the way emotions could shift without warning, the beautiful chaos of a mind that had evolved for survival in an unpredictable environment rather than harmony within a structured society. "Your species is remarkable," she whispered during a moment of relative calm midway through the process. Her words resonated directly in my mind rather than through my ears, carrying harmonics of wonder and respect. "I understand now why you chose to stay. Your capacity for self-sacrifice isn't just cultural, it's built into your neural architecture." The connection deepened as her reproductive cycle reached its peak. For a period that felt like hours but may have been only minutes, the boundaries between our individual consciousness dissolved entirely. I was Marcus Chen, human xenobiologist driven by curiosity and compassion. I was also Cassandra, Zephyrian expedition leader desperate to save her people. I experienced the universe through compound perceptions that no single species had ever achieved. The chaotic beauty of human consciousness merged with the harmonic precision of Zephyrian thought. When the cycle finally completed and our neural systems began to separate, I understood something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Individual awareness was just one note in a vast symphony of possible ways of experiencing reality. Human and Zephyrian consciousness were both incomplete on their own beautiful but limited interpretations of existence that achieved something greater when brought together. As the neural interface powered down and we returned to our separate selves, I realized that the man who had entered the connection was not the same one emerging from it. The experience had fundamentally changed my understanding of what it meant to be human, to be conscious, to be connected to others across the vast distances of space and biology. Cassandra collapsed into an exhausted but peaceful sleep as her system finally achieved the neurochemical balance it had been craving for months. Her skin had returned to its normal silver blue, and her breathing had slowed to normal rhythms. I had survived the connection, but, more than that, I had discovered something about human potential that no one had ever imagined. We weren't just adaptable, we were capable of bridging consciousness itself across species barriers. And there were 6 more Zephyrians whose cycles would peak in the coming weeks. Part 3, The Man Who Cannot Be Destroyed. The success of the first neural bridging changed everything about my mission and my understanding of what it meant to be the last human in this corner of the galaxy. Over the following month, as each of the remaining Zephyrians entered Velthari, I refined the process and deepened my comprehension of cross-species consciousness integration. Each connection was unique, revealing different aspects of both human and Zephyrian neural architecture. Velnas, the expedition's engineer, experienced human consciousness as a fascinating chaos of parallel processing. She marveled at our ability to multitask emotionally, maintaining awareness of multiple feeling states simultaneously while still functioning rationally. Through her orderly, systematic thought patterns, I learned to appreciate the elegant efficiency of Zephyrian mental organization. Tessmore, their cultural historian, was overwhelmed by human memory formation. Where Zephyrian memory was precise and catalogued like a vast library, human memory was associative and emotional, with each recollection connected to dozens of others through webs of feeling and sensory experience. Through her consciousness, I experienced the profound sadness of a species watching its own history come to an end, but also her amazement at humanity's resilience and adaptability. Each neural bridging taught me more about the nature of consciousness and connection. By the time I helped the last Zephyrian, Morendis, complete their cycle, I had developed what could only be described as a hybrid consciousness, still fundamentally human, but enhanced with Zephyrian harmonic awareness and multi-level processing capabilities. But the most profound change came not from the neural connections themselves, but from what they revealed about human nature under extreme circumstances. The old Marcus Chen, the one who had been paralyzed by overthinking and self-doubt, had been systematically dismantled through each act of courage required to help the Zephyrians survive. "You have become something new," Cassandra observed during one of our daily discussions after all 7 cycles had been completed. "Your neural patterns show changes that should not be possible in adult human brains. The connections you have formed with us have literally rewired your consciousness." She was right. The neural bridging had created permanent alterations in my brain structure. I could now perceive electromagnetic fields directly, sense emotional states through bioelectric resonance, and process multiple complex trains of thought simultaneously. I had become, in essence, a bridge between human and Zephyrian consciousness, no longer entirely human, but not alien either. The implications of this transformation became clear when we received an emergency transmission from Earth 6 months later. The message was fragmentary, damaged by interference, but the essential information came through. Earth had been attacked by an unknown alien force. Human colonies throughout known space were under siege. The species was fighting for its survival. "We have to help them," I told Cassandra as we reviewed the transmission data. "Your ship has faster-than-light capability. We could reach the outer colonies in weeks, Earth itself in 2 months." But Cassandra's response revealed the true scope of the choice before me. "The neural modifications you have undergone make such a journey extremely dangerous," she explained. "Your hybrid consciousness requires regular exposure to Zephyrian bioelectric fields to maintain stability. Prolonged separation from us could cause your neural integration to collapse, potentially causing permanent brain damage or death." I was faced with an impossible choice: stay with the Zephyrians and maintain my enhanced consciousness while humanity fought alone, or risk everything to return home and help my own species, knowing that I might not survive the journey. The old Marcus Chen would have agonized over this decision, weighing probabilities and analyzing options until paralysis set in. But the man I had become through trial and transformation saw the choice with perfect clarity. "I'm going home," I said. "My species needs whatever advantages these neural modifications might provide in first contact situations. If I die in the attempt, at least I'll die trying to help rather than living safely while others suffer." Cassandra studied me for a long moment, her skin cycling through patterns that I now recognized as deep contemplation mixed with concern.
You understand that this choice may cost you everything you have gained through our connection?
The consciousness expansion, the enhanced sensory awareness, the harmonic processing capabilities, all of it could be lost.
I understood.
But, I also understood something more fundamental about the nature of strength and weakness. The weak version of myself had been defined by what he feared to lose. The man I had become was defined by what he was willing to sacrifice for others. There's something else, I continued, feeling the rightness of the decision settle into my bones.
You're coming with me.
The Zephyrians had spent months in isolation, believing their species was doomed to extinction on a sterile world far from home. But, the neural bridging experiments had proven that consciousness itself could bridge gaps that seemed biologically impossible. If humans and Zephyrians could achieve neural integration, perhaps they could also work together to find solutions to both species' survival challenges. Your ship has defensive capabilities that could help protect human colonies, I explained to the assembled Zephyrians. More importantly, your knowledge of neural integration could revolutionize how humanity approaches first contact with hostile alien species. We could teach other humans to form the same consciousness bridges that saved your lives. The debate among the Zephyrians was brief but intense, conducted in their harmonic language at frequencies that painted the air with sound. In the end, they reached consensus through their species' characteristic collaborative decision-making process.
We will accompany you, Cassandra announced. Not just because we owe you our lives, though we do.
But, because the connection we have formed suggests possibilities for interspecies cooperation that neither of our peoples had imagined. If consciousness itself can bridge the gaps between us, perhaps it can bridge other gaps as well. The journey to Earth took 7 weeks, with Cassandra monitoring my neural stability throughout the trip. The Zephyrian ship's biomedical systems were far more advanced than anything humans had developed, allowing for real-time adjustment of the bioelectric fields that maintained my hybrid consciousness. But, more than the medical monitoring, the journey allowed for something unprecedented in the history of either species, the development of a truly integrated crew. By the time we reached the outer edges of human space, we had developed communication protocols that combined human intuitive leaps with Zephyrian systematic analysis, tactical approaches that merged human adaptability with Zephyrian precision, and decision-making processes that drew on the strengths of both species while compensating for their respective limitations. We arrived to find the situation worse than the fragmentary transmissions had suggested. The attacking force called themselves the Dominion, a collective of species that had mastered a form of consciousness suppression technology. They could overwhelm the neural systems of most sentient species, turning them into mindless servants within hours of exposure. But, they had never encountered resistance like what we could now offer. The first battle took place at Proxima Station, where Dominion forces were attempting to break through the defensive perimeter protecting the Sol system. Their consciousness suppression waves, which had overwhelmed human defenders throughout the outer colonies, were useless against minds that had been fundamentally altered through cross-species neural integration. I could feel the suppression fields washing over us as we engaged Dominion ships, but the hybrid consciousness I had developed simply integrated the attack as another form of information to be processed and harmonized. Where normal human minds would have been overwhelmed and shut down, my enhanced awareness treated the suppression waves as discordant notes in a larger symphony that could be brought into harmony. More importantly, the neural bridging technology allowed us to share tactical consciousness in real time. During combat, I could access Cassandra's systematic analysis capabilities while she drew on human intuitive pattern recognition. Our combined consciousness could process battlefield information and adapt to changing situations faster than any single species crew could manage. The Dominion had conquered dozens of species through consciousness suppression, but they had never faced opponents who could turn their own weapons against them. Using modified versions of the neural bridging technology, we began broadcasting harmonizing fields that disrupted their suppression waves and freed their enslaved crews. The liberation of a single Dominion ship created a cascade effect that spread throughout their fleet. Species that had been enslaved for years suddenly found their consciousness restored, and many immediately turned against their former captors. What had begun as humanity's last stand became the first battle in a galaxy-wide liberation war. The man I became through that conflict was someone the old Marcuschen could never have imagined. I had started as a scientist afraid of making hard choices. I became a bridge between species, a warrior who fought with consciousness itself as a weapon, and, ultimately a catalyst for the kind of interspecies cooperation that would reshape the galaxy. The neural modifications that should have killed me instead made me into something unprecedented, a human who could not be destroyed because he had learned to exist as part of something larger than himself. The consciousness I shared with the Zephyrians, and, eventually with dozens of other species, created a form of distributed awareness that could survive the destruction of any single individual. But, more than survival, it created possibility. The galaxy that emerged from the Dominion War was one where consciousness itself had become a bridge between species rather than a barrier. The neural integration technology spread throughout human space and beyond, creating networks of enhanced beings who could communicate and cooperate across biological boundaries that had seemed absolute. Years later, when historians asked me about the transformation from frightened scientist to galactic catalyst, I always returned to the same fundamental truth: the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, because he becomes part of something that transcends individual existence entirely. The Marcuscan who stayed behind on Research Station Omega-7 died during the first neural bridging with Cassandra. The consciousness that emerged from that transformation was still recognizably human, but it was also something more, a proof of concept that consciousness itself could evolve beyond the limitations of single-species biology. In the end, the story of humanity's first contact with the Zephyrians became the story of consciousness itself learning to transcend the boundaries that evolution had created. We discovered that intelligence wasn't just about individual minds solving problems, but about minds connecting across impossible distances and differences to create forms of awareness that no single species could achieve alone. The last human became the first of something new. And, in becoming that bridge between worlds, I learned that the greatest strength comes not from preserving what you are, but from being willing to become what the universe needs you to be. End document, final entry date, 2389.203. Current status: Marcuscan remains in active service as First Consciousness Bridge, Galactic Integration Council. Neural Stability, Optimal Species Integration Index, 47. Confirmed successful bridges across 23 different species. Addendum: the consciousness bridging protocols developed during the Zephyrian crisis have become the foundation for all interspecies diplomatic contact. Request authorization to begin integration trials with recently contacted hegemony species currently in system quarantine. The weak die. The strong survive. But the transformed transcend. Final personal notation: Marcuscan.